Archdeacon William Edward Thompson, priest 42 years, pastor of St. Agnes for 32 years, pioneer in the areas of civics, education, and religion. On a beautiful Sunday afternoon, William Edward was born.
I was the first child of my parents. My father happened to be working in Hatchet Bay, stroke Allenstown, when he met my mother. And being the first child of the union, my mother was not comfortable, I suspect, with the grannies in Nassau, and so she went back home to have her first child, and it happens to have been myself. And so I was born there. I spent the first 3 months there until I was big enough to come to my real home on Hay Street, where mother still lives and where we all were brought up.
Family members recall that he was a beautiful baby.
So much about that child, that big pretty baby. Yeah, he was so pretty. That was a pretty baby.
His mother returned to Nassau 3 months after his birth. For Willie, as he is still affectionately called, his childhood was normal.
Our childhood, the childhood days that, and I say because Arthur and myself is really an Arthur. We're exactly 1 year and 10 months apart. I was born on the 17th of December. He was born on the 17th of October, exactly 1 year and 10 months to the day. And so we grew up like two peas in a pod. And the days in Hay Street were extremely pleasant.
Mother always bought 2 of each. I never wore hand-me-downs. If there was a shirt, the bigger one was for him, the smaller one was for me. A very memorable occasion was when we got bicycles for the first time. Now, I can't remember this, but they tell me that when these bikes arrived from National Bel Hess, he was 4 and I was 2. And he showed me the smaller bike. He said, "That is yours, and this one is mine." So we grew up knowing that one was senior and one was junior.
From the time I was a little girl, at about, I guess, 5 or 6, I can remember him being around our house at Christmas time for what they used to call, my brothers and he used to call, the cowboy parties. He and his brother Arthur and some of the other boys used to come around Christmas time because Ivan's birthday was New Year's and my brother Paul's was in December. So they had a combination Christmas and birthday party almost every year for a few years at Christmas time. And of course, I was the only little girl around. They were all older than I was. And but they never wanted me to be there, so I enjoyed just watching them, looking down and watching them from the porch while they played cowboys and crooks.
Our main party would have been, for us boys, the Ivan Hanna 2nd of January cowboy party. The only boys were allowed up on Jail Alley. They had the yard and the space for that.
Everybody would go dressed in their attire, you know. You must have on your Ivan's birthday, I think, was the 3rd of January. You know, during the time when you were still, say, sporting around your Christmas gifts and things, and everybody would just wear them.
And then now and then we'd have parties at the Twinkers too. Freddie and the others, they would have a party on their birthdays at the other end of the corner.
Religion was an integral part of William Edward's development. And although he has very strong Baptist roots, his paternal grandmother, Mrs. Maud DeVoe Thompson, who had a tremendous influence on him, saw to it that St. Agnes was an important part of his upbringing.
Well, it's because of Aunt Maud that Archdeacon Thompson became an Anglican. He wasn't always Anglican. He was Baptist, and rightly so.
I am a 3rd generation of preachers born and reared in this country. So consequently would mean that Archdeacon Thompson is a fourth generation of preachers born and reared in this country.
And Maud was into St. Agnes.
Okay.
And one of my sisters, May, who was adopted by St. Maud, was almost the constant companion of Billy and Ada. Those two sort of paired together. And both May and Maud were part of St. Agnes.
My grandfather was the Baptist minister in charge of Metropolitan Baptist Church. His story is a very interesting one in that he's a Lutheran man. He's from Savannah Sound, was a teacher for years, and then moved to the United States for a time. Was at Bethune-Cookman College over there in Florida as the caretaker. Was brought to St. John's here in the 1920s because he was considered an educated minister. And in fact, he was. There's some books home in our library that I still can't read because he was as educated as any minister of that day. And so he inevitably became a leader in the community. And he built his church on one end after he was put out of St. John, had a big fight up there. And he took half the members, brought them down and opened Metropolitan. And the name Metropolitan indicated the kind of man he was. He was a man who had been to England to the Great Imperial Conference in 1925. I don't know him, and this accounts for my being born in Eleuthera because after he died very early, he's only 52, Daddy had to leave being a teacher and other plans and had to go and make some quick money. And so he went to Eleuthera as the secretary come young manager up there at this Major Benson development. That's where he met Mother. I spent my formative years between my uncle's church, Bethel, St. Agnes Church, my official church, and Transfiguration. Transfiguration is also founded by my grandfather because when he and my grandfather, when he seduced, as it were, Charles Thompson out of St. Agnes to be his assistant at Metropolitan, when they fell out, Charles Thompson then opened Transfiguration. And so 4 churches in this area I have direct links with through my grandfather and through my own personal experience. And so a lot of my spirituality is because of my association, not with Baptist grandfathers and the 4th generation stuff, no, but the fact that as an experience, I spent a lot of time, I learned my Bible in Transfiguration. I learned my Bible again up at Bethel, where Uncle Cody was the pastor. Then, of course, it's St. Agnes, which was my official church.
He, like all the young boys of St. Agnes, enjoyed serving around the altar.
We were both choir boys from very young. I am older than he by 2 or 3 years, and I recall that it was I who was responsible as a choir boy and server for asking him to join me as a server. He likes to preach from the pulpit that he was my old boy, which means that I was a theorist on one occasion and invited him to act as old boy. But my recollection goes back further than that, when we both were acolytes. We both were very tiny in stature. And of course, in those days, we had special mornings which we would serve at weekday masses. The servers were divided up in pairs. And also, of course, there was the children's mass every Thursday morning, in addition to Sunday school and the services on Sunday.
The most distinguished of all of us, of course, is the Governor General, Thorvald Tenquest. So for about 2 years, we made up a serving combination as acolytes, because the acolytes were paired in a formal way. For example, Archbishop Gomez and Mr. Raphael Cartwright, they made up a serving combination. My brother Arthur, and I believe, and Charles Sweeting. So we all were paired, we all were mates. After Sir Orville left and Leon Tenquest and myself, we made up a combo. And so you would have been. And then along with that would have been the Hannah boys, particularly Sparky, who was deceased, our organist. And then I mentioned Leon Tenquest, who was also deceased, and Steve Strawn. These are the younger ones to me. Steve Strawn and Charlie O'Brien, they're all younger. I believe Charlie and Arthur must have served together. And then the little O'Brien boys, people like Huey and the ambassador, Basil, but they all were little boys. I remember that stage, little is when you are 2 years older than the other person, and you are 12 and he is 10, then you don't keep company with him. It's only after you get 90 and he is 88 that you become equals. And then, of course, the Pinder boys, Lloyd and Dudley in particular, they all relocated to the United States. And we all were around St. Agnes together. My bosom friend, Junior Coakley, my cousin too, the expert on sports, a lawyer now, but he was never an altar boy. But because we were relatives, and he was on Lewis Street East and I on Hayes Street West, we always were tight too. And he really comes between myself and Arthur.
Well, my fondest memory, and many fond memories of Archdeacon Thompson, but my most fond one go back to the time of our youth, and we were both avid comic book readers. I would recall when Father Thompson was, or when Billy, as we called him, he was reluctant to lend me one of his comic books because I didn't have one to give him in return. And at those times, I would just pull rank on him. I would go and speak to his mother and say, Cousin Cora, Willie wouldn't lend me one of the books. And then she would shout, Willie, loan him one of the books. And that was that. That was it. I got the book and I went home smiling. And that always made him mad. But we were good friends and we got along famously. I mean, just like brothers.
And then there had been the whole nation of out-of-church friends from Hay Street, all the Farm Road boys. People like Oscar Johnson, that's still alive, Jimmy Thompson, deceased, James Sweeting, who's still alive, and Chris Malakias, he's in Agnes too. And a whole nation, Albert Wood, and William James, all the James boys, the Nancy boys, they all relocated in Florida. Because remember, the Bahamas of the 40s and 50s was the Bahamas of genuine relocation. And so a lot of our boyhood friends relocated in Florida. So when I go over there, it's like being home again, because times were hard around here in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and not to mention before that. And so this staying home as a Bahamian is a relatively new experience and luxury that we have today. But since the last 30 years, we have not had to migrate. But we were mainly migrants, and because we were not lazy people, our men particularly went anywhere, as far south as the Panama Canal and as far north as Wilmington, Delaware, looking for employment in the 1800s and 1900s, right up until the 1950s, in fact.
Apart from his brother Gilbert, his cousin Canon Dudley Strawn is his closest friend. He affectionately calls him Sadi.
It's very difficult to share one memory of William Edward Thompson. Tom and I, as I say, are family and friends, and we go back from St. Agnes. We go back before he even entered high school. Oh. And by the time, and as things would have it, I was sort of the big brother, not only to Archdeacon Willie, but to Gilbert Arthur, and even to Dr. Phyllis. Okay. And so, as members of the Boys Brigade, as part of the St. John's, that's the only school we shared outside of Covington College. Okay. Because I am the older one. John Chipman would tell you that Willie Thompson and Arthur couldn't fight, but they didn't have to fight because nobody could touch them. Because Dudley could fight, and nobody would dare fool with them unless they knew they can get beat up by Dudley Strawn.
I can remember, particularly once we were going to a cricket match, and a little boy interfered with me, and Willie attacked this little boy and got a sound thrash as a result of his attacking this chap on my behalf. And that is the sort of protectoral role that he has really played with me.
My generation looked at Dudley, and the others looked at Dudley, myself and all the others, as we kept the spirit of family excellence together. And so his biggest contribution to me was that he always encouraged us. He always encouraged me. He also would fight for us too, because he was extremely belligerent and wasn't scared of anything. First time I met him at Rumpke in 1939, he was in a big fight where some boys killing him, beating him to death, really. And they still couldn't get him to stop the fight. And somebody says, "Who's that little red boy?" They're blowing like that. And they say, "That's your cousin Dudley." First time I met him. And I don't believe we were formally introduced at that particular time. But later on, and of course, the two of us like two peas in a pod. And we have indeed, been able to see all of our dreams basically fulfilled, and to be able to be players in, I hope, in the development of our country.
William and Arthur were nurtured by their loving and highly supportive parents.
My father was a bartender and was not churchy at all. But he saw that we went to church, that we were properly equipped to go to church and school. He was an extremely intelligent man. So we inherited from him a bunch of academic gifts, really. And of course, on mother's side, the same thing. And my mother was, and is, an extremely special kind of person. She's now 87 and still going strong. She is of her own persuasion, and so you can't get her to do something that she doesn't want to do. And I know when to back off and to leave her to be, knowing that whatever she does in the long run is going to be the right thing. And we are just blessed with having, had those two as the foundation blocks for our lives.
Another foundation block was his paternal grandmother, Maud DeVoe Thompson.
She was a seamstress, she was a cook, she was a tailor, and she was a DeVoe. That means a lot. She was one of the daughters of the great Moses DeVoe. They owned Clifton at some stage. And so she was full of ambition, particular appreciating education. She's a Rumpke person. Rumpke has ever had the highest percentage of children who had been to the government high school and later on to St. John's and the rest, because the whole Rumpke tradition, because of people like Mama, was one of educating children, and everything catches on, everything is contagious. So one member of the family does something, and the others are watching, and so the siblings can say, well, my cousin Willie in St. John's, my cousin Clyde is in Government High, my cousin Zelma, my cousin Dudley being there first, and of course my cousin Maxine, the first of all of us to go to high school. As a result, we were brought up with our contemporaries around us, pushed by these highly ambitious Rumpke women in particular. They all were widowed very early in their life, with the exception of Aunt Ellen, that is Dudley's mother. But all others were widowed very early. They all were married, they all had children, but they were widowed very early. So they were extremely ambitious and talented women. And as I indicated, they had some powerful memories of the past, where they were the rich people in Rumpke and had horses and had servants and everything else. And so we were brought up with a real sense of being somebody, to be honest.
Both William Sr. and Corinne were school monitors, and this accounts in part for the educational prowess of their offsprings. Monitors
were those who were considered to be bright enough to teach their peers. It's part of the old Madras system, which the British Empire evolved in India to make up for the absence of trained teachers. And the monetary system in the Bahamas existed up until the 1960s, where you had these small communities where there's one teacher, not necessarily a trained one, responsible for teaching the whole school. And so the brighter students were being picked out and were allowed to stay on beyond 14. They got about 6 shillings a week, which is a month, which is less than 6 shillings. The daily wage was they got about $4 shillings a week in some instances, and so they got the equivalent to that. And so everyone was lined up to be a monitor. And all of the monitors would have come eventually your school teachers, particularly people from the family. I know some New Providence type, because New Providence type didn't want to be teachers because they didn't want to go to the islands. And eventually also the commissioners too came out of that same group up until quite recently. So these would have been the quickest children in this class, who could spell, who could read, who could write, who could add much better than the others. And so both Daddy here in Nassau and Mother in Allenstown came from that particular select pool. So it means that their children definitely will inherit some genes in terms of good memory and all the other tools that the British system requires you to have if you are going to make it up with in their particular selective world, where they're eliminating those who can't remember things and who can't spell and who can't, in fact, catch things the first time.
I can remember at Western Junior School coming first together, he in grade 3 and I in grade 1. And we were all brought up on the stage together to be congratulated. Now that resulted in our father, who felt that we were some of the smartest children in the world, boasting about his sons. He called Billy his crown prince. Now, I don't know I can't remember what he called me, but Billy was his crown prince.
Dr. Jackson Burnside recounts his school days under the tutelage of William Thompson Sr.
I thought he was a fair teacher, and he wasn't concerned with us bringing back memorized answers. He was concerned, both he and I got to give Edmund Johnson and Harold Nash and Harold Wilson. I have to give them that credit, because they wanted us to know the assignment, but they wanted us mostly to understand the assignment. Now, to me, that was more important to me than getting 100% on the paper. That he could take the paper and put it aside and ask me questions on the subject that he asked, and I could speak how I saw it. Now, that is what they encouraged in those days.
Archdeacon Thompson attended St. Agnes Day School, Western Junior, and St. John's College.
Yes, we went through all the elementary and secondary schools in Nassau, right up to St. John's College. And after he went on to Codrington College, then we just got reparted for a while because he was gone for many years. Not many years, 4 or 5 years. Then friendship was rekindled again when he came back, and we were always as close as ever.
We grew up in the same church as boys, St. Agnes, and we went to the same high school. He was coming out Form 5A when I was in Form 3 when I ended. That was in 1951. And I lived on Jail Alley, and he lived down on Market Street and Hay Street. So we grew up together. He was more closer to the age of my sister. My sister is older than I am. So when you're young, the big boys, he's the bigger boy and we were little boys. But as you grow older, of course, then the gap begins to close.
Much of his curiosity for knowledge resulted from the environment around his home.
So whenever the relatives came, on both sides, from either the Rumkey side, my grandmother's side, on Daddy's side, and my mother's side, they would basically live with us. And one of the main centers of them coming together. And then apart from that, because it had a porch and it was in the center of everything, although I believe people live in Grandstown were much more in the center, as on Blue Hill Road where all the processions pass. It meant that it would be a meeting place. My father was an extremely intelligent and extremely curious man who would hold on to points and argue all the day until the sun came down and rose again. And I suspect that myself and Arthur and Phyllis, we inherited some of that curiosity. That's on Daddy's side. And then, of course, on the other side, we had Hutchinson and Mia Brown. So it means that we also come from another talking and very curious type of person. And so our place was the meeting place for these uncles of mine, for the then pastor of Metropolitan, the Reverend Jerome Hutchison, who had been in the United States, had been to Charleston, came back and opened and succeeded my grandfather. There were about 2 ministers between him and my grandfather himself. And Reverend Jerome Hutchison was a highly educated man and was a great community leader. And so all the people stopped by to see him. His real house was through Martin Street, that's a little off the beaten track. So he presided on our porch the whole week. And so people like Lawyer Adley, Lawyer Toot, they all would pass by to talk with Reverend because he was one of the power brokers in the area, because the ministers, particularly ministers of the great churches like Metropolitan, St. John, and Bethel, they were community leaders. And there were people who could read and write letters for you, give you hints on how to apply for things, so it'd be in the center of helping their communities. And so pastors there always doing things for people. And then after that would be my other uncles, like Reverend A. Hutchinson, who was mother's brother, and Dr. H.W. Brown, who was mother's uncle, and then Daddy's crowd. And so I grew up hearing about, not reading, but hearing about and being aware of, since I was born in 1933, so I grew up hearing about Haile Selassie, how he's kicked out of Ethiopia, so in those days called Abyssinia. I knew about and heard discussions about Mussolini and Hitler and Chamberlain, about the great disputes which were taking place in Europe. Of course, the World War began in 1939, and so I would have heard about that. I would have, in fact, been accustomed to the sick, so I can appreciate what was going on. I remember joining the rest of the British Empire and lamenting the fall of Singapore to the Japanese in 1942. Well, 1941, really, in December, about Pearl Harbor, about the sinking of the Repulse and the Prince of Wales by the Japanese, which ended the battleship era in naval history. And so all those things were real to me, and after too, because we were hearing Daddy and Uncle Cody and Pass and those talk about these things. And so we, of course, heard about Marcus Garvey, heard about Joe Louis, of course, listened to all his fights, and knew about the movers and shakers in the world. And Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion. And so they were all household names, and they all, of course, encouraging us a great sense of curiosity. And then my Uncle Cody, who was, when he came back, and was the most literate, I suppose, of all the Baptist ministers in the country. And so he would come and would be dropping French words on us and getting us to recognize that foreign languages could be fun, and that they could, in fact, help to broaden your perspective. And so these influences that I was privileged, in fact, that we were privileged, Arthur and myself, to have, they definitely impacted upon us. I hope, well, I know for the better.
Well, actually, what happened is he was really surrounded with intellectual people like the late Reverend J. Hutchison, Dr. H.W. Brown, and his family surrounding his father, Mr. Willie Thompson. I had a lot of ambition for them, and he really was surrounded with. Really, he got a lot of his education really on the outside, really, because in my opinion, a lot of one's education is not just in the classrooms, but really in the University of Life on the outside.
Dr. Brown and your daddy have been great influence to us, because when they came home from college, they always hung out at Mother's house. And so they would drop in words, and when they felt like showing off, they would drop a little Latin word or a little French word, and we would try it out on one another, right? And the books that also had a cousin called Pass. Yeah, Parson. He was a Parson. He was at the Metropolitan Baptist Church. And so he held court on our porch. He would sit on the porch, and different people who would pass by would stop to talk to him, and we would listen. So we were what you would call always gathering gap seat. But we were always there together, listening to him. Our cousin Jerome Hutchinson. And there were the uncles, and there were the different family members who all sort of gathered around our house. And they talked about what Shakespeare called wise saws and modern instances, and we listened to them. So it became like a fount of learning, what are things you put handles onto after you were exposed to these same things in more formal settings.
Codrington College, the gates through which Willie stepped up to a new and higher echelon of academic and soul-searching development.
I went to Barbados in September of 1952. It was the old colonial world, it's 52, the independence when I come to Jamaica. And there I began a very exciting and very happy 5-year stay in Barbados. What was so wonderful about Barbados was it was the first time you went into a country where you saw black people highly educated in a way that didn't even begin to happen up here. And so the Codrington years were extremely exciting and wonderful years.
Archdeacon Thompson and I met on the patio or the porch, whatever you may call it, at Codrington College, the 4th day of October, in the year 1952. We sat next to each other without talking to each other because we didn't know which one was a freshman or which one was a guard. It's only till later when Father Sam came down and said, "Fresh, what are you all doing there?" Then we realized that both of us, because a freshman is a first-year student, so then we realized that we were first. And from then on, we became very, very close friends.
My acquaintance with Willie began in 1952 when we were both freshmen at Codrington College. He did theology and I did classics, but I think we both, through that, complemented one another. I remember him as someone who was always full of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, very keen, and my fondest memory, I would say, is his keenness about cricket.
Archdeacon Thompson and I were college mates at Codrington College in the 50s. As a matter of fact, he was just about a year my senior, and towards the end, he preceded me as the senior student of the student body.
Willie was a model student, and although he participated in all of the extracurricular activities of the college, his studies came first.
I met him doing his bachelor's degree from Durham as an external student at college. And what I think we are all impressed about was his dedication to his work. His room was just overlooking the back of the college over the garden, and he could be seen out of that window all hours of the night, hard at work, very much hard at work. When he was asked, "When do you sleep?" He said, "Well, I have my whole life to sleep. I am busy with my studies now."
Archdeacon, to me, was he wouldn't want me to say that, but he's brilliant. He is definitely a scholar. He picked up Greek and Hebrew, and very fluent in both of them. He, as I said, was very studious. He read a lot. His favorite book was Charles Dickens. While we were down there playing and laughing and doing all sorts, he's up in his room reading Dickens. He was an avid reader.
When I first entered Cottington College, and that would be in 1959, I used to hear many people talking about Willie Thompson. He was obviously an outstanding student during the days he was here, but unfortunately he had left by the time I had arrived. Archdeacon Thompson had been trained at Cottington during the time when it didn't only teach theology, but also taught classics, and he therefore would have been well grounded in the classics himself. And you would certainly pick that up as you talk with him, and he rattled off bits and pieces of Latin.
I happened to be in a year where I happened to, to get what in Cottington would have been the best kind of degree available, because very few people got second-class honors degree from the University of Durham, even in Durham itself.
He was a very dedicated man, very spiritual man, a man with very high principles all through his college career. He was a man who did not take any lower standard. He was a no-nonsense man. And he set a tremendous example to his fellow students, both as a student and as a religious man in the chapel. I think he was sacristan at one stage, and with his Bahamian tradition, he set a very high standard in liturgics and worship at the college.
Cottington was the first opportunity provided for Caribbean people to show that they could do British university work without going to England. Because in 1875, the University of Durham set up two institutions to help the Anglican Church to produce proper priests. Because a proper priest in those days should have known Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. So they set up Foro Bay in West Africa in Sierra Leone, which is now the University of Sierra Leone, and Cottington College in Barbados. Cottington, after 1948, was skipped, where the UE came in with the University of London, and eventually we ended up with the UE. And so Cottington up until 48 was the only place. And many a distinguished West Indian, both in church and state, could trace his tertiary education to Cottington College, and I happened to catch the end of that. And the environment was extremely stimulating because it's 1952. So the Caribbean is on the verge of the new explosion, which is going to lead to the Federation, and is going to lead to the independence in the 60s and 70s. So it was a wonderful experience. So and then, of course, in my case, I happened to get involved with the Pickering family, an old distinguished Barbadian black family, one of equivalent to the Milo Butlers, except that they were not in politics. I saw another side of Barbados. I saw the side of the Barbadian black elites and their ways and their habits. And you could really fully understand why Barbados has been able to contribute so much to the development of this whole region, particularly in the small islands.
He was one of the family. There was no difference between him and the other members of the family. Wherever we went, he would be there. Among the people he brought, that was a good thing, Selwyn Strawn, Dudley Strawn, and Drexel Gomez. They used to come to see us. So much so that when his brother Arthur came to Codritch, Arthur also came to stay with us. So we had the two of them together.
He loved sports, and Codrington provided him with the opportunity to play his favorite sport, cricket.
Cricket, which is my game. He can tell me more about records, more about who did that, because he was an avid sportsman. And from him, I learned a lot about baseball. I don't know if he was into football, but I know he was into baseball and cricket. And he read books about them.
It was his intention that someday he should take over from one of the W's. And I think throughout the whole of his life at Cottington, he was always one of the first to be on the cricket field.
We played games together, we cricket. They appointed me captain so that they could get picked on the team anyhow. And along with the present Archbishop and Archdeacon William Thompson. And we were known as the crew from the Bahamas because we were always together.
I've always loved sports, and so my peers will know that there's no keener person in sports than myself. And a lot of us in that generation, because I am a sport enthusiast. My brother Arthur is just as much. Father Strawn, just as much. Bishop Gomez, just as, all of us in Agnes boys. And we all grew up surrounded, we next door to the government ground. That is now part of it is called after me, which I'm grateful to them for. And that association, because my generation also laid out to play softball. Diamond down there. Sometimes I regret that because by laying that out, we killed cricket, which used to be all there also. Well, again, I wouldn't push that. Because I feel that Bahamians should be exposed like we were exposed to both cricket and baseball and softball and football and soccer. Like I am privileged to be exposed to. So I haven't given up my fight and battle to give cricket a chance again, because cricket is a game played by the only game which has more players than cricket is soccer. No one plays baseball. So I like sports, and I've ever loved sports. I said I'm not really too much a sportsman, as my peers will quickly tell you, and as I must admit, but I used to play cricket badly. I used to play table tennis badly. I used to play baseball. Well, not so much baseball, softball badly, but I happened to have all the equipment in my house. So I automatically was a second baseman for the team, a second baseman that cannot pivot. You know what that means, that he can't do the double play. But if he owns all the equipment, then he has to have his play. And so I've ever liked sports. And all of us in Agnes boys, all of us Farm Road boys, we like sports. All of us would argue all day and make. Now, I also like horse racing. And if I were not a priest, that's how I would spend my money. I would go to Hialeah and Gulfstream. I can buy any numbers. But I'll bet on horses now. Because I like them. They turn the bend and go to the whip. So my friend Sammy Sanders is out there watching this. That's the Reverend Sammy Sanders. You're still my favorite jockey, sir.
In sports, well, although he can't play any games, they name a softball park after him. He can tell you who played what, who hit so many home runs in what year, who was defensive back for the Dallas Cowboys at a particular time, who was the quarterback, softball, could tell you who won the marathon in 1956 when Zetopek came on the scene. He can tell you everything almost you want. He can tell you Bazinas and Serena and Sampras and all of them. That memory. But in terms of playing, no. He played cricket at a very immoderate scale, I would like to put it. He played, but not with much success.
Having been ordained to the diaconate a year earlier in Barbados. On December 21st, 1957, he was ordained to the sacred priesthood at Christ Church Cathedral in Nassau and was appointed diocesan missioner.
I was diocesan missioner helping out Father Cooper, Father Collingwood. And then eventually I went to Exuma in 1959, and then I came to St. John's between 61 and 64 as a teacher. Then I went to Long Island for about a year and a piece, and then came to 67 to St. Island.
In 1964, he was stationed in Long Island. It was at Long Island where he met young Tennyson Wells.
Father Thompson came to Long Island as the priest in charge of St. Paul's Parish. I would say back in the late 50s, early 60s. And at the time I was what you would call an acolyte, serving at the altar in St. John's Anglican Church in Buckley's, Long Island. And so I've known him since that time. And he has, his brother, Gilbert, Father Gilbert, or Canon Gilbert, he is Archdeacon as well, and Father Pestina, three of the persons who were very influential in my early life. And they kept me in along with my parents, of course, in the church, and encouraged me to study and read. And as a result of that, I was successful in what is now the NGM Major High School in Buckley's, Long Island. At that time, it was the Buckley School, just call it Buckley School. And I went from Buckley School with the help of Father Pestina and the Archdeacon William Thompson to St. John's College. And so, to a large extent, they are two persons who were very much responsible for my success over the years. Father Thompson was a very, what you would call a pastoral priest, a person who went around and visited parishioners. And he visited our house on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, I think most times when he would come to St. John's to hold service, the service is like once a week or even twice a week. He would stop by home and my parents would prepare meals for him. So that was a kind of a stop off for him in Long Island. So, I've known him from then, and then when I went to St. John's, I came to Nassau knowing very few people. And he was then one of the teachers at St. John's. He had left Long Island and came back to Nassau. And so when I entered St. John's College, he was like a father to me, a big brother, so to speak, to me. And I could have gone to him for advice and things like that, because I knew at that time, I knew very few people here in Providence, apart from my, some of the other persons who were in St. John's. But in terms of a person who I could go and get advice from, he was one of those persons. And he encouraged me all along. I mean, even though in later years, when he was, you know how we are politically, I always tease him that one of these days he will join us, join me. But I have not been successful in getting him to do it yet. Hopefully I will.
While assisting at Holy Spirit Anglican Church, Father Thompson fell in love with Rose Adele Bailey of Chippingham. They were married on April 26, 1968.
My parents and the Thompsons have been family friends. My father and Mr. Thompson, whom I never met, were friends for a very long time. And I just cannot tell you the exact time I met William Edward. I have known him all my life. I think I became more aware of him in the late 50s when he returned, because he was also a deacon at Holy Spirit Church, and he had relatives living in front of us. So as far as I can remember, I have known him all my life.
Rose describes what she admires most about her husband.
His boldness for his God and his religion, his academic skills, his thirst for knowledge. He's constantly learning. He is an avid reader.
Well, I was blessed with a good wife. Was always being flexible, open, and though I was not obedient, but I could always persuade her to some extent to see things my way most of the times.
As a teacher at St. John's College, he was able to assist in positively influencing many of his students.
My fondest memory of him happened back in 1967 as a young student at St. John's College. And he was just made rector of St. Agnes Parish. My mother believed or thought I needed some extra help with my language upon entering college. So lo and behold, she goes and solicits the help of Father Thompson. Around school, my year in particular was a mischievous bunch. And having to go to Father Thompson at the rectory for evening classes was a little frightening. You know, in school, he was a very stern disciplinarian. But at the rectory, one-on-one, the warmth and compassion he had for students willing to learn, there was a different outlook from that perspective. I mean, you know, he would break the English language down for a common man to understand. And I believe from then to now, his teaching or his input in that respect in my life has made me a better person today.
St. Agnes has a very rich history that is directly linked to the development of the New Bahamas. 1967 was a critical time in the Bahamas, and to discuss the Archdeacon's tenure as rector of St. Agnes Church is to discuss this time in Bahamian history. Joining me in the discussion are the People's Warden of St. Agnes Church, Mr. Frank Butler, and the Priest Warden, Mr. Ralph Wood. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome.
Good evening. Good evening.
This evening, we're going to be discussing St. Agnes and the role it has played and continues to play in the development of the Bahamas. Mr. Butler, explain for us the hierarchy of the Anglican Church.
Immediately under the bishop is really the synod. When the synod is not in session, then the diocesan council operates to do those things that need to be done. So the bishop works in conjunction with the diocesan council. To assist the bishop, he has, in our diocese, archdeacons, the dean, and the cathedral chapter. Those are the canons of the church. And then in each church, there is a priest, in many cases a rector, and in some other non-self-supporting parishes, there's a priest who is termed the priest in charge. In each one of these churches, there is the vestry who looks after things in the church, and a part of the vestry are two individuals, one, the priest warden, who takes care of things directly connected with the priest and to support him and ensure that he's not rolled over. And there is the people's warden, who takes care of things to look after the interest of the people and to ensure that their interests are also protected. And then, of course, you know, there are the lay people who are the most important of the whole setup. But that very basically is the whole setup of what the hierarchy of the church is about.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. For our listeners who may not know, can you provide some historical overview, Mr. Wood, of St. Agnes, why it was established, when it was established, and some of the rectors? Can you give us some history?
Yes, it started out as a school, a day school for Negro children, and on the corner of Market Street and Coleman Street in 1835. In 1841, Father Rogers, William James Rogers, Jordan Rogers, began to keep service in the
schoolroom. That was in 41 and 45, the bishop from Jamaica came and dedicated the schoolroom as a church. That was the beginning of St. Agnes Church.
However, and he has talked about the fact that the school is established to educate, and which is very important, these young children of slaves. And of course, that was not a thing done by chance. It was a planned program, because that was 1835. Virtually, slavery was abolished in 1834, but there was a 4-year sort of cooling off period until 1838 before, I suppose, things really came into effect. So they were really trying to prepare these slaves for this new freedom. So education was certainly very important, and the Anglican Church took a serious role in that regard.
Well, Mr. Wood, you've been priest warden for some 57 years or thereabout. Tell us about the rectors that you would have served with and some of the accomplishments that you would have seen them achieve in the parish.
Before I do that, can I just touch on those, who were there before my time?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
As I said, Rogers was the first one, and he was succeeded by Reverend William John Woodcock. He also was a teacher. He came out here, he was about 31 years, and he was the one who took his money and established the Woodcock School for the black children in the area. Unfortunately, he became ill and he died in 3 years, and he is buried now in St. Agnes Church, the only priest buried in St. Agnes Church. Before he died, he recruited a priest, a fellow by the name of Robert Swan, to teach in Woodcock School. Swan wasn't a priest, Swan was a deacon, but after Woodcock died, Swan was asked to take over St. Agnes, take charge of St. Agnes. He later became a priest, served there for several years, and he moved on to the cathedral. After Swan left, Father Fisher, James Halpman Fisher, became the priest of St. Agnes. And he is on record now as being the longest serving priest in the Bahamas. He stayed there for 50 years, over 50 years. He was the one who introduced the high church movement to the Diocese of the Bahamas. Before that, everything was low church. Yeah, but he introduced incense, the wearing of vestments, of cassocks and other vestments, and everything high he brought in there. The church. And before his time, all the ministers in the various churches in Matthews and Marisol were called pastors. He was the first one to use the title of father. Yeah, even while he used it for some years at first, others in the other church still went by the name pastor. But now we have all fathers, but he was the first one to introduce that.
It's interesting to know that Father Fisher was a white Jamaican priest, right?
He land for the cemetery. Yeah. And he already built up the church. Father Fisher.
All right. And after Father Fisher?
After Father Fisher, we had Father Audley Brown. Yeah. Now Brown was a teacher. He was the headmaster of the diocesan grammar school, I think they call it. And that was the only school of the high school standard in the Bahamas, the only one. And that's where anybody who wanted what you call a high school education went to him. There was no government high school, paying college, and nothing like that. That was the school. And many of the prominent people who later became successful in government and business and everything graduated from that school. Of course, my father was he always mentioned Father Brown's name. And some fellows, you might know, E.P. Roberts, whose school is named up there. He was one of Brown's brightest students. Brown was also a musician. He not only played the organ and the piano, but he repaired and built organs. He built the first organ in St. Agnes Church, and he also built the organ in St. Patrick's, Governor's Harbor. Yeah, it was he who taught persons like Percy Hanna and Boyd Cambridge and others to play the instrument. He's a talented man. And he had a private school in the nighttime for grown-ups too, those who want to improve themselves.
After
Father Brown, Father Herbert George. He also was a teacher. His school was in St. Mary's Rectory. The thing is called the Western Grammar School or something like that. He was a teacher. And he was a single man when he came in. He got married to one Coleman, I think her name was. And then the decision was taken by the vestry to build a rectory to accommodate him and his bride, yeah.
Okay.
After Father George, the next one was Father Canon George Lauren Pyfram. He came in 1936 from Long Island. He was the first Bahamian to be made canon of the cathedral, Father Pyfram, and the first, one of the first Bahamian priests in the Bahamas. One of them, not the first, but one of the first. Yeah. After Canon Pyfram, we had Canon Milton Edward Cooper. He is the one who came in and inspired many of the young Bahamians to become priests. That includes Father Thompson, two Thompson brothers, Father Strawn, and many others. Father Cooper. He was there for about 19 years. During his time, he renovated the old schoolroom. He went up one floor and made a new schoolroom there. I mean, he did quite a lot to the church. He built up the church. And it was sort of rough when he first came in because the people had been accustomed to white priests, all the time. They weren't accustomed to that. So there's some difficulty. But the people got to like Father Cooper.
Paved the way for
Father Thompson. Yeah. Then Father Thompson moved in. It was smooth sailing because Father Cooper had already broken down all the barriers.
Let's take a look at the social and political climate of the 60s.
With everything that led up to 1967, really was a big situation. And we've talked about what the church has done in terms of education. Well, a lot of what we needed to do to get to 67 was educating people in terms of letting them know that they had the capability to do whatever they want to do. Remember, Ella Finley was our first prime minister, right? Premier, our first premier. A black fellow, a black man. That's basically what we were talking about. And later on moved on to become Sir Lyndon. But of course, there were a lot of us, despite what you see around us today, there were a lot of our people who had tremendous trepidation about putting black people in these positions. But the church was building on it, and these people grasped the vision that they were human beings and that they had the capabilities of any other human being. We had part of that Negro spiritual that we used to use from time about go down, Moses, and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Well, that was basically what our situation was all about. We wanted to free our people, and that was the mood of the time.
It was a happy coincidence that Archdeacon Thompson did become rector of St. Agnes in late 1967. Because in 67, the advent of majority rule meant that there had been a great release of the creative spirit of their being.
That's right.
And he would realize from that point that being free and unshackled, he could dream any dream, he could achieve any height. And the sky was his limit.
So true.
And so it was most fortuitous that the Archdeacon came into St. Agnes at that point. And being the kind of man he was, you've seen St. Agnes move to become the cathedral of the South.
And so, in 1967, he was welcomed to his home parish as rector and would lead the parishioners of this great historic church into the dawn of the 21st century.
When Father Thompson took over from Canon Milton Cooper, I was on the vestry then, and I was the one who gave him the keys for the car. I met him at the airport when he came in from Long Island. Of course, he served in Long Island then for 3 years. Of course, I knew him long before then. That's at St. Paul's Parish in Long Island. And then he came in, his cousin, George Thompson, was running then for the Progressive Party in Luttra. And we all met him there at the airport, and I drove him up to the rectory, and I showed him around. And I gave him the keys for the car. Of course, we always were buddies, don't care whatever other, I would say, differences we had. We didn't really always could sit down as spiritual. And he was my spiritual leader then and spiritual friend. And we go back many years.
Well, 67 is the year of majority rule. Everyone is in an upbeat mode. So everything is moving. People are getting accustomed to change. And so to be able to come to St. Agnes at that time is an experience that cannot be paralleled. And so it was my good fortune to come to St. Agnes at that particular time. And St. Agnes is, as you know, a very special church in the history of the country. It was put where it is in 1841 or thereabouts to help the newly emancipated slaves and the liberated Africans that Governor Grant had put in Grantstown since 1825 to claim their patrimony and to maximize their potential through the power of the gospel. It's an Anglican version of the gospel being the main player because we were a British colony. So the churches between to remind us of that, Lewis Street, Lewis Grant, Grantstown, and Coburn Street. Governor Coburn felt that the church had a part to play in stabilizing the society in the Caribbean, as it had done in stabilizing the British people, particularly after the French Revolution. Everyone got scared to death of radicalism, and so they needed the church to become more involved. So Britain will spend a bunch of money building churches in the 1800s and building schools too for the first time. Because Anglicanism also requires people who can read and write. Because we have a written service that not only keeps out people from being leaders who can't read and write, but also exposes membership to literacy. And so we'll give them an advantage on people who are not exposed to that. And so St. Agnes ever played that part. And as my friend was Bobby Moore, who the Guyanese historian, as he said, the church's job was to help throughout the empire to produce black and brown Victorians, as people who knew their place and indeed knew where they stood in the social order. And St. Agnes, like St. Mary, which is a year ahead, played a prominent role in doing this for the Bahamian people who were of African descent or who, in fact, were of mixed descent in a way that no other denomination, because of history in this part of the world, had a part to play. And being a book religion, it had to have a school. So we start off a school, and then Father Woolker comes along and leaves his money to build schools for the people in Bainstown. And then later on, Father Fisher comes along and is there for 50 years. Is able to stabilize this, to help our people to put in sanitation systems and all kinds of things. And then, of course, to produce someone like Joseph Robert Love, who will end up in Jamaica, who will inspire Marcus Garvey, the leader of the Black Awareness Consciousness Movement, the greatest of those of the diaspora black, as blacks away from Africa, known to the world. And so that's a St. Agnes person, as from Father Fisher, a white man, of course, Father Fisher, a white Jamaican who loved our people, who served them, and who, in fact, used the power of the gospel, like this Anglican version, with its insistence on literacy. And so all the early teachers and everybody else in this country, among the people of Africa, would be Anglicans. It would have been. To some extent still are, but that's changed. And that's just the way it is. And so St. Agnes has been in the forefront of this humanization process through the power of the Anglican version of the gospel.
Although he served on one of the committees in 1973, he, like most Bahamians, were afraid of independence.
All Bahamians of my generation, particularly of African descent, felt that the old Bahamas had to go. I myself at some stage wasn't really so much pro-independence because I'm only the product of my times, and so most Bahamians were scared of independence. But there were some very forward-looking politicians around us. I mean, having the biggest argument with them about it, who could see us going the whole way. I initially, so I really wasn't too much in the forefront of that. What I would have been in the forefront of would have been definitely standing with those who felt that we needed to have a new Bahamas, where the majority of the people would be able to run the place and to provide opportunities for all of our people, not excluding people of European descent because they are Bahamians too, but ensuring that Bahamian people are in fact managing their affairs. And I also felt that there was a need for us to emphasize the dignity of our African heritage, not to the exclusion of the European, but of course one of the realities is that some people, when you start talking about being pro-Africa, they conclude that you are anti-Europe because probably they themselves, when they are pro-Europe, they automatically anti-Africa. But of course, you can't be that way. That ain't the Christian approach. But I did feel and still feel that there is a need to help us to rehabilitate Africa in the psyche of our people. And so over the years, I have lost no opportunity in reminding our people, both black and white, that the African side of our heritage is a noble and wonderful one.
There's also a social side to Archdeacon Thompson. He participates in his weekly lunch bunch activity and is a member of Sigma Pi Phi fraternity.
He can only be considered a man for the Bahamas only because he was born in the Bahamas. Mm-hmm. I've heard from traveling with him around the region that he could have been from any island, anywhere. The same way he operated in the Bahamas, he would do it in Barbados, Trinidad, America, Canada. He has a wide knowledge and a history of all of those islands and from whence they came. He's a model Bahamian citizen. His major contributions have been in the Bahamas, but that is not to say that he couldn't contribute anywhere else in the world.
He also loves to travel.
At a later age, we started to be traveling partners for summer holidays. Every year, once we were on the East Coast, we had to go to Charleston, South Carolina.
Why?
Where Father, he's a big historian. Yes. He said this is where the slave masters came from that came to the Bahamas.
The Archdeacon's tenure at St. Agnes has been both colorful and rewarding.
There is something about St. Agnes, and especially after Archdeacon came, the bond of love that he shows with the people and the way he directs us, the way he walk and talk with us is so common among us. Because sometimes to be a priest, you would find that, the priest is only in the office, or the priest is only up high, that you can't really get to him, you can't really say what you would like. But Archdeacon is there, and he's always open to hear your problem and to help you to solve it. If it needs spirituals, he's always there. He can tell you exactly where to go to find anything to help solve your problem.
I think he has done a magnificent job. He has demonstrated sincerity as a Christian man. Mm-hmm. And he not only for the people of St. Agnes, but the community on the whole. And that can be proven by the government himself, by the government of the country. But they have recognized him in many different honors they have bestowed upon him. And then you look down here. The last one was the ballpark in remembrance of such a great man as Archdeacon Thompson.
Father Thompson really has done very well. Here we have the junior choir.
We never had a junior choir. And since he came there, he formed this junior choir.
Okay.
We had the senior choir because I was always in the senior choir.
Okay.
And the bells ring and ring us. That came since he's been there.
The one thing I like about him more than anything else is that he is a person without any kind of malice. I have seen him in situations where he needed to be upset, to be angry, to be critical of people. I have never, ever, ever heard him say anything negative about anybody. And sometimes we try to goad him into doing that. Wouldn't do it. It just isn't his way to do that. That's the primary thing that I like about him. I think he's a good spiritual leader in that he sets that example of not bearing malice against him. The other thing is that he's probably the greatest historian that St. Agnes has ever had. He recognizes the history of St. Agnes and why it was put where it is, why it is what it is. And he's always able to relate what happens today to what happened yesterday and cause St. Agnes to be put there to minister to the people, spiritually, even politically, and socially. And I think that he, more than any other priest who has been there, and I go back to Father Cooper and Father Pyfron before him and Father George who christened me, he really and truly recognizes what St. Agnes is all about in terms of its position and its posture in that area.
He has also continued with St. Agnes's sports tradition.
The first cricket team over here after started in St. Agnes Church. It was first called St. Michael's in my father's day, then became St. Agnes. Out west, St. Albans is the first cricket team out in the west from St. Mary's. And St. George's were the accident that it's called because the eastern people, they were linked with the Anglican Church up there. And so St. Agnes played his role over here. So the first athletic team from this age is called St. Agnes also. And so when we used to have the old sports on Empire Day between the two main districts, East and West, St. Agnes would be one of the teams. And even at our own song, St. Agnes, St. Agnes, St. Agnes win, not one, win the cup. St. Agnes, St. Agnes, St. Agnes win the cup, not one. Must be kind of my Latin days and historic present tense, which is a vivid way of describing the present that the past tense will not describe.
Archdeacon William Edward Thompson has served the Anglican Church with distinction, locally, regionally, and internationally.
To all the Christian community, he has been a good example of the best the church has to offer. Full-time ministry, and he's there in the community. He's an icon. He really is an icon. I call him one of the proudest princes in the Christian church.
My being part of boards and the rest, that's part of the whole historical heritage of the Anglican Church. Where the priests have a part in islands when the commissioner went away, the priest became the commissioner. And here in the Bahamas, the priest was always in the middle of boards before any other denomination, and so on. So really, it was just a continuation of the role that the Anglican priest has played in the development of the social life of the Bahamian people.
A great deal of his ministry has been involved with our ministry in education in the diocese through the ACA, the Anglican Central Educational Authority. It's been my privilege to appoint him as chairman, and he has been the chairman for many years. I can't remember just at this moment how many years. And the progress that we have made in education has largely been due to his enthusiasm about it and his support of it.
He has been a member of the Provincial Synod, and as a member of the Provincial Synod, he was elected to the board that supervise Codrington College. Also, as a member of the Provincial Synod, he was the representative for the Caribbean, and so he has represented the Caribbean Church on many international levels and at many international councils. He was also on the council, I can't remember the exact name, but it's a council consultative grouping that made up the agenda for the Lambeth Conference. So he was on that as well. And so in the 70s and the 80s, he would have been very well known in the Anglican world.
Key to understanding our rector, William Edward Thompson, I believe, is to see him in terms of the historical process which effects the transition from a colonial social reality through to a national community. And of course, our ongoing struggle to create a kind of national and really empowered people. And indeed, in terms of our life at St. Agnes, he is the embodiment of this struggle and what it means. You know, he's come to exemplify for us the best of what we can bring from the colonial system and indeed move beyond as we shape, again, our social reality to be more relevant to the needs of our people.
One of the things that I find very, very wonderful about Archdeacon Thompson is in our diocesan setting, even at its darkest hour, there was a Willie Thompson in the midst of us as clergy, saying there's hope. You know, it's not all bad. As he always said, the cup is not half empty, but half full. And that sort of breath of fresh optimism is what I will always remember about Archdeacon Thompson and his ministry among us as clergy in the diocese.
Well, Archdeacon Thompson has had quite a tremendous influence on my life as he has been rector of St. Agnes most of my life. I think he came to St. Agnes when I was at the age of 12. I had just entered high school. And we have had quite a interesting relationship because I believe that there were many of us that he adopted as his sons, both he and his dear wife, Mrs. Thompson. And throughout the 32 years that he's been at St. Agnes, we have grown to love and also respect him. Now, I wouldn't say we agree with everything he did or what he said to us, but we respected him. And whatever he has done or said, either in chastising or in encouraging, he has been a tremendous influence on our lives.
I never met a priest with a greater knowledge of West Indian history, not only church history, but the whole history of West Indian development, and really spent time talking about this. And certainly one was assured that in any conversation, it was never done because he would have his input and would bring some light to bear upon West Indian society.
Willie has always been a careful person, partly because he does not wear his heart on his sleeve. And sometimes he gives the appearance of having a firm exterior, but that is only a mask that he wears, that he is a very soft and kind person. And there are many, many persons who can attest to that. And many persons have been beneficiaries of that kindness and that affection. And I hope and I pray that in the years to come, that persons will come to appreciate the person, not the Archdeacon, but really the person, and to know the grand person that he is.
My dear people of St. Agnes, this in very many ways is an historic service. It is an historic occasion. It is an historic day. 52 years ago, in 1947, we saw the end of one era and the beginning of another when Canon Milton Cooper became rector of this parish. 20 years later, in 1967, on the demise of our beloved Canon Cooper, Archdeacon Thompson became the rector of this church, and we all grew to love him and to be extremely grateful to him. I speak this morning in 4 categories. As a history boy, I wish to thank him on behalf of all his childhood friends and all his neighbors. As a St. Agnes boy, I wish to join with all of you in thanking him for all that he has done for us, for this church, and for this parish. As the chancellor of the diocese, I wish to thank him for all that he has been to this entire diocese and to the spiritual side of this nation. And in my present capacity as the Governor General of this country, I wish to thank him on behalf of this entire nation. He has been and is a good and faithful priest. He has been an excellent rector of this church. I am cognizant of the fact that his ministry is not complete, and he will go on to do other ministry. But he has been and is and will continue to be a good and holy man whom we are all pleased to know, to appreciate, and for whom we give God thanks.
Well, I believe, first of all, that it has been my good fortune to have been given the privilege of being an Anglican priest, particularly at a particular stage in our development, and to have been allowed to be at the Great St. Agnes for 32 years. And so there's really no special sense of achievement which I have, except a real sense of gratitude to God, parents, wife, and all my friends. I happen to have come home to my old parish, surrounded by my old colleagues and buddies like Robert Francis and Jimmy Butler and Ivan Hanna and Solen, all of my former playmates, really. And the amount of respect they have shown to me. And the older gentlemen like Carlton Williams, Costa Williams, and more recent people like President Vestry, Mr. Butler Frank, and the people, my own priest warden, Mr. Ralph Wood, and all the people, Mrs. Lightburn, Secretary Miss Heaven, all the vestry members, and then of course Rafi Cartwright and Boyd Kemp, and Charles Sweeting and Phil Collymore, the people who keep our weekday services going, our sexton, particularly Mr. Cooper, and then Miss Nan and Mrs. Mins, the people who keep the church clean, and all of those people, my dear Pandora Johnson, my newspaper woman, and Sybil Bethel. And I can get in trouble now if I try to list all of them, so I can't remember all of you. And of course, my old teacher, Miss Enid Duncombe,
and the mothers of the parish and the fathers, Mr. Blyden, and a whole nation of responsible and caring people that I have had the privilege of serving. All those older members, Mrs. Loretta Ferguson and Mrs. Alice Fernanda, that's the older people, Mrs. Williams up on the hill, and then Miss Eva down here, and the old Coakley families on both sides, and the whole group of leaders of our youth bands, of our chapters for women and committees for men. All of those people, the members of the choir, all our choirs, and all of the pillars of our parish who have indeed made my stay in Rose Day so happy. And then the more recent major players such as Henry Dean and Miss Lightman, responsible for something like this, for these special celebrations of our leaving, the retirement committee, and the work that they have done, how our people have responded so well and have taken my decision to retire, and have respected that. And of course, can't leave out Bishop Eldon, my second bishop, who was so pivotal in helping me. And I came home in 57, he came looking for me because I really didn't know him. And we've been friends and fellow travelers since then. And of course, our new bishop, Bishop Drexel. And of course, we all go back long and far. He and Arthur, of course, are the same generation. And my prayer is that one day I shall begin to deserve all of these kindnesses. And my sense of confidence in the capacity of women people to get on with making our history even a more glorious one has never been stronger, because of the fact that there is a St. Agnes, there's a St. Barnabas, there's a Bethel, there's a St. John, there's a St. Francis Xavier, that there's a Christian church in all denominations that will continue to be pivotal to the full development of us as a people in this part of God's vineyard and in this glorious part of God's word.
The animals are chased by nature for about 10 or 12 months, so human beings have the capacity to be chased for 12 months by nature. So let's understand. And all of the problems in our Bahamas, really, to a great extent, can be traced to our people allowing themselves to be dehumanized by not taking up their chastity options, or we allow them to tell us that we cannot be chased, something weird and wrong about self-control in sexual matters. That as a woman, if you try to do it, that you are a sissy, and that you are a male, it's the same thing. And so we bought that package, and the end result is around for all to see. For this is the first generation history of the world in Christianity, where fornication is not considered to be a deadly sin. This is the first time it's ever happened. And the end result is around for all to see. And we in particular, because of our history, who indeed have a history where Christianity, void of sexual chastity, was sold to us in the plantation Christianity of the plantation, where when the slave master allowed the preacher to come in, he could preach on 4 things. He could preach all day on no murdering, and all day on no stealing and lying and envying, but he couldn't come to number 7. He couldn't talk about adultery because slaves can't get married. And so remember, that's a reality. And what upsets me is that there's so much preaching which in fact, does not help us with that to understand we have a unique problem in the Caribbean. Because of the plantation. Because of the plantation, which is only 100 years, 140 years from us. Where we are being fed a vision of Christianity which does not have in it an automatic call for sexual accountability also. And that still is cursing us. And the fact that 9 over 7 of our children today are born out of wedlock, well, you know what that means. The socialization process of this human animal that we are, that only a man and a woman can begin to give, is very, very much at risk. And so the end result is to be found in the border boys and the rebellion and all the other expressions. Think of male anger with their absent daddies, the Jerry Ropers of the last 30 years, and with the cheating of our children of their legitimate patrimony of having a mother and a father, into whose home they are. And for those who in fact cannot get married, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the point. Nothing wrong with being a decent single person. And so we get back to that, the better it all will be. And Our Lady is the example of the call to chastity in that sense of sexual self-control, a legitimate human option. Only human beings, in fact, can do that. The animals have it done to them. And no part of the animal world you can have 2 sets of young around unless there are 2 people there to take care of them. In our case, you can have 5 children in 8 years. And no one woman can even begin to do. That's totally contra natura, totally against nature. And the end result is the chaos that we have today in so many areas of our life. So as we dance around that, keep dancing. And you will, in fact, find there is no tune that can fit it because it's against nature. Mistakes are made, oh yes. No one does not find. Particularly in our culture, where we still fighting the old plantation 4 commandments, duty towards God, arrangement that number 7 was thrown out. You didn't have 5 like people in Europe. You only had 4. And as a result of that, you developed some extremely wrong impressions of what the Christian life is like. But thank God we can work